The Motor Dream podcast is recorded on Wallamedigal land of the Eora Nation. It always was and always will be the lands of the First Nations of Australia.
This is the Motor Dream podcast.
It is the podcast where my guests can dream a little about what they like to have in their dream garage if money was no issue. Hello everyone, I'm Conor McNally and welcome to episode 7 of the Motor Dream podcast. It's hard to believe that we're now 7 episodes into this little adventure that I kickstarted some weeks ago. If you've been listening from the word go, thank you as always for your patronage. If this is your first episode, welcome to you, dear listener. Enjoy this episode, and if you like what you hear, hit the subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and have a trawl through all the previous episodes readily available right now. There's more episodes to come in the coming weeks, so I hope you do stick around. So what is this nonsense about the Motor Dream podcast? Well, I'll tell you. I tell my guests that one day they wake up and check their phones and discover that they receive a text to say that they need to check their bank balance. They then open their bank app and suddenly discover that their balance has gone to infinity. They are billionaires. As soon as they discover their newfound fortune, they get an email from a mystery benefactor that tells them that they can spend anything that they like and buy any car or bike or machine that they want. But there is a catch. They are only allowed 3 cars in their dream garage. It sounds easy, doesn't it? But let me tell you, it is very, very hard, as my previous guests have already discovered. You'll get to hear from drivers and riders from within the motorsport game, as well as those who work in the motoring industry, and on the odd occasion, you will hear from some prominent personalities who all share the same passion for cars as well as motoring. Now, if you listen to the first episode, you may have heard about my career over the last quarter century. Since 2022, I've been an integral part of SBS as senior producer and editor for SBS Sport, and I've got to work with some outstanding personalities who share a passion for sport as a whole. One of my colleagues is part of the presenter lineup for the Tour de France coverage, as well as the Dakar Rally, and he is unashamedly French by name, by nature, and by blood. His name is Christophe Mallet, and he grew up in a country where cars are very much a part of French culture. In fact, the French have been innovators in the car world, such as the pneumatic tyre, windscreen wiper, and front-wheel drive. Yes, the French actually invented those things. And the French took great pride in their motorsport exploits, at a time where national pride was very much on show. Christophe grew up in a car-loving family, and as it turns out, his grandfather played an integral part in Renault's efforts during the turbo era of Formula One during the 1970s and 1980s. Christophe now calls Australia home, and he still holds that passion to this very day. And when I discovered that he loves cars and Formula One as much as I do, well, it was a no-brainer to get him on as a guest. I hope you enjoy my chat with Christophe Mallet. Christophe Mallet, welcome to the Motor Dream podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Conor. Bonjour, 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 I should say.
Oh, merci beaucoup. It's great to have you. You are very much ensconced in the SBS family, particularly when it comes to the Tour de France. You've been a part of the coverage for quite some time now. But what surprised me more than anything, other than your love of road cycling and the Tour de France itself, is that you love cars. And you grew up in a family that was very much a part of Renault and its Formula One efforts back in the 70s and 80s. That's an amazing story in itself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. It's really something people don't really know about myself as well. Yeah, you're right. My granddad used to work. He was an engine engineer for the Renault Formula One team in the time of Alain Prost and in the early 80s. Mm-hmm. The quirky thing is he's actually never been to a Grand Prix because he was back one of the guys back in the factory cleaning up the pistons and cleaning up the engines. So he was a little man in a big team, but because of him, we were all involved in this because that was his livelihood, and there was this real team spirit around Renault where they were creating something new. There was the whole turbo era, and we were all engulfed in this because as a tradition, my dad my cousins, myself, and my granddad, we used to watch the Grand Prix together if he wasn't at the factory. And at the time, the telemetry wasn't this big. You prepare the engine and you would send them away, and you would not correct them from back in the factory. So he would have his Sundays free to be with us, and we would watch the races with him, and we followed the whole Alain Prost era, of course, because of the flag, but also a little bit because my granddad as well. Absolutely.
It was a very interesting time, wasn't it, to watch Renault develop the turbo engine, because it happened in the mid to late 70s with the late Jean-Pierre Jabouille. And then, of course, René Arnoux came along, another French driver, and then Alain Prost. The French were so ensconced in the development of the turbo era of Formula One, and yet they used to be mocked at because they always used to blow up all the time. As a Frenchman, how frustrating would that have been at the time when it was constantly blowing up, trying to find that reliability?
So it's funny because I was a kid, and I remember a lot more of the victories than the frustration. I would say, but I've got a few frustration more later on in life when Alain Prost, because I followed, of course, Alain Prost, mainly Alain Prost when he lost his championship by half a point with Niki Lauda when he was at McLaren.
Yes.
And that probably is my first early frustration. In the Renault era, we were more about the success, because I know, I sort of remember how hard they were working around, and how my granddad was involved again in this. So I don't think I remember personally any frustration. But looking back, so one point for you, you named few of the drivers, the Jabouille, the Arnoux, and the Prost, of course. But these guys were nutcases. Look back how we would say now they would let's say they had character.
Yes.
They were just a bit different than other drivers. Yeah.
Yes, I definitely agree with that. I've always been a bit of an Alain Prost fan. Like, Alain has always been, I guess, meticulous in his preparation. He was very calculated in his strategies and that. But there was always something that just stopped him from winning a world title for Renault. And he did come very close a few times, but just internal politics and just bad luck. I mean, it must have been frustrating at that time, being a Frenchman.
100%. And also, you're right, he was a lot done more to politics than anything else. I think Renault was the number one brand of cars in France. He was still at the time partly owned by the state.
Yep.
I think he still is a little bit, but he was owned by the state, basically. He was nationalized. So there was a bit more than just the yellow, white, and black on the cars as the color. There was also a French flag that was basically was meant to be working. And as any public service, I guess. There probably would some loophole somewhere that would maybe stopping you from being 100% efficient. But it's looking back, it's a bit of a shame. But I mean, look at how much the technology has evolved and how much Renault was part of this as well. And it followed on with, we even had Peugeot in Formula One for a little while with McLaren and so on. So Peugeot was a lot better in rally cars. And this is where, for me, actually, in terms of frustration, it was weird to move my allegiance from the Formula One being the Renault cars, but the Rally Dakar, of course, which is my other passion.
Of course.
And I'm lucky enough to do lots of work with yourself, actually, on the Dakar for SBS. But the whole Peugeot era followed on from the Renault era in Formula One. So yes, there was a frustration, but it was harder to switch from one brand to another brand,
It's like here in Australia, you either go for General Motors or Holden, or you go for Ford. So it must have torn you to have switched French allegiances at the time, from Renault to Peugeot. Given that Renault weren't necessarily active doing the Dakar, and Peugeot definitely were, but Peugeot were very successful in that time too. You got to remember, Arie Vatanen was like the king of Dakar for a good period of time, and he also did Pikes Peak in the Peugeot 405, which I still think is a beautiful car. When you look at the vision, it's just
unreal.
It is.
And you look what Sébastien Loeb did a few years back as well, just to have the homage for him to just to do the Pikes Peak as well in a Peugeot as well. But the idea was quite funny, because you're right, here you've got Holden or Ford, and in France we've got Renault and Peugeot Citroën. I think what helped is the fact that they were winning. They were winning on the category 2 or the super category for the rally cars, the rally championship. They were multiple time world champions champion.
Yep.
And when these cars were banned, they had to find an escape to get the budgets that developed this super mega car, the 205 Turbo 16, that was made for rally cars. They had to move it to somewhere else, and they found a natural destination where basically it was the desert and the sand of the Dakar, which made them uber successful there as well.
Where do you think the pride of French motorsport is right now? Because we do have a team in Formula One with Alpine. Renault are very much backing it with a full French team, French car, French engine, French drivers. But there's
French lineup.
French lineup. It's all there, but it's just not.
But you know where they're based? They're based in Enstone in the UK.
Exactly.
And then my granddad used to work in the Avery factory, which every time I go back to my family, and actually, as a matter of fact, when we drive with the team on the road to Paris to reach the Paris for the Tour de France, the team at the Tour de France, we always pass the factory, and I always pinpoint that is where my granddad used to work, And he says Renault F1 on it, big time. It's on the verge, on the side of the motorway, but yeah, it's today the pride of French sport is interesting. Alpine for me, and I come back to this as well with my granddad. I always absolutely loved Alpine as a brand, and he was forgotten for a long time by Renault. And I tell you why I was always in love, because my granddad was a bit of a clever mechanic, and my uncle, so his son, is paralyzed from the right end. So he can't shift the gears from the right hand. Okay, so when you drive a car and you want a sports car, but you don't have a right hand in France, you can't put the gears because your gears lever is on your right hand side. Yeah.
Yes.
You drive on the you would call it the wrong side of the road, but we call it the right side of the road. But basically, what they did, he had an Alpine A310 V6, which they cut in half, like sideways, and they put a special gearbox from a Renault 16 with a selector of motorbike, like a motorbike selector, and an automatic. They fitted basically a manual gearbox, but with a motorbike system on this car, and refitted the car together. Totally, probably illegal these days, but in the 80s in France, that sort of was okay.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. And they did this, and they painted the car with, my granddad got some paint from the actual official Formula One cars, and the car was painted at the Renault colors, exactly like the F1s. And they did all this in their own garage at the bottom of their house. Incredible. So Alpine for me, as growing up, I tell you what, when he came, every time he would come and pick me up at school, I was the king of the school. He would come with this, you were the king.
That is amazing. Do you have any photos of that? Like, do you like?
No, sadly, no. I've got photos of that car when it was still green, but I'm in a hunt, and actually one of my targets this year to go to Tour de France is to get my uncle to give me some photos, because he has some paper photos. They were not digitalized at the time.
Yeah.
But I'm really keen to get some. So if I got some, I'll get you but you have to wait for July.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be very keen to have a look at that. That I just find amazing in terms of like the structural rigidity and everything. You wouldn't get away with it now. It just
no. But the thing with the Alpine is they've got a mono chassis at the bottom, so they're basically a tubular chassis at the bottom.
Right.
But everything else is fiberglass. The whole body is fiberglass. So that's why it was okay to do it, because they were able to cut the car in half and actually not destroy too much of the strength, because the actual chassis was not a full chassis. It's not like a monocoque chassis. It's really a tubular chassis. It's basically two tubes in the middle of the car. It's based like that. But you need to know this to be able to actually do it. But yeah, imagine being the first person to take the axle and cut the car in half. You just bought a car from the shop and you're going to cut it in half. It takes guts and knowledge. What you do.
It's mind-boggling, actually. I don't think I could even do it. I mean, I admire those that do modifications to the car, like cut and shut and everything, but that's just next level.
There was a whole article in a French newspaper about it as well, because they, with the link with my granddad, they came across and called Échappement. And basically they did a whole article on this. I'll find you all this once I get to France. You'll be amazed.
Yeah, I'd be very keen to have a look. Why are the French so ensconced in cars? Why are they so passionate about it? Because I look at some of the things that many people in the history of automobiles or cars, that they've done so much that have contributed to what we take for granted these days. It's quite incredible, the big list that the French have done.
Yeah, so I think there's a historical part of it. First of all, we like to claim that a good part of what you have in a car today has been invented in France. Even from the early days, we could almost argue that some of the idea of having an automobile was invented in France. The racing was sort of invented in France. Some of the first Grand Prix happened there back in time.
Yep.
But there's another historical point. I think it's after the Second World War, because we had to rebuild the whole industry. Everything was destroyed after the war. And one of the key industries that were eyed in by the government at the time was the automobile industry. And because in Europe there were only just a few countries producing cars, one of the other was Germany, which was destroyed as well, and of course Britain as well. We had to basically rebuild everything from the ground up, and the government poured millions and millions and millions of I was going to say euros. No, they were franc at the time. To just rebuild certain industries, and one of this industry was cars. And when you think about it, there's not many countries that have their own brand of cars. Okay, that's true all across the world. There's a few countries that build cars, but France has got three major ones: Renault, Peugeot, and Citroën, and they all they're three massive big brands that are French. Which in Europe, you might have one or two brands per country, and maybe Germany is a bit like this. But if you go to Spain, there's really only one car. So it's part of this whole development after the Second World War. But if you look at the place of this car manufacturer as well, I know people disrespect or disregard sometimes the brand Citroën, but look at what Citroën has invented, because they are the wacky cousins. Okay, Citroëns are the wacky cousins. They're the one that think it's okay to put a rain wiper, a window wiper in the middle. They decide that, yeah, that's fine. Your wheel is not going to, the center of your wheel is not going to turn. It's the ring around. They decide, but they invented things like some of their suspensions were used for a long time in Rolls Royces. So Rolls Royce could not make anything better than a Citroën suspension. So they were running cars with Citroën suspension.
It's the hydropneumatic suspension that they became well known for.
Absolutely. But all those are just crazy ideas. But Citroën were crazy and wacky enough to sell them.
It works. I've been in Citroën, so they just work. It's probably
incredible.
The best ride that you could ever have in a car.
My dad had a taxi business and was a taxi driver for a long time, and he could at the time where a lot of the taxis were Mercedeses and German because they were solid and impressive. He always went for the Citroën because, one, he had a great price with the dealership, but secondly, they were the only car that were not wreck his back driving all day, because they were just ultra super comfortable, and they would make his working environment perfectly safe for his back, not the other cars that were a lot more rigid.
I was going to say the French have also been instrumental in developing the internal combustion engine, the pneumatic tire,
the intermittent stuff, like your intermittent windscreen wiper. You don't know this French invention. Like the fact that you can just go on and off, but it just select the raindrops, when the rain drops on your windshield, and the fact that it detects that there is rain. This is a French invention. There's many other small French inventions around the cars that you're using every day and you don't know they are.
Even front-wheel drive. They were the pioneers of front-wheel drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where did your love of cars come from? Because you've obviously grew up in a family that was involved in Formula One through your grandfather, and your father worked in taxis. Did you feed off that?
Yeah, it's interesting because I love cars, but in France there's a real move now towards the ecology, and so, for example, we don't necessarily have, like, the love for the French Grand Prix has gone. It's not necessarily, like, we're not madly in love with the French Grand Prix itself, for example. But when it comes to me, it has to be roots with my granddad and my uncle, because they were always tinkering in cars, and just for the love of cars. Like my granddad, I'll give you another example. He was when I look back, it's just crazy. But like he had a Renault 16 that didn't really work well, and he could have easily bought a new car, but he didn't want to buy a new car, but he could have easily afforded it.
Yeah.
And one day, and I remember this story, one day my grandma was cooking, and by the kitchen, what she sees a truck bringing a shell of another Renault 16, like just the shell. So he bought a new shell. And he refitted his own car inside the new shell, and just because he wanted to do it, he wanted the project of having to refit his own car into a new shell, and that's the sort of guy he was. So in a way, that's probably must have fed into me, because in France we can drive mopeds at age 14, without a license. All you needed was your birth certificate saying you're 14, you can drive a moped. And then basically he helped me getting my first moped and fixed it, and put a new exhaust line and then a new cooling system, and he basically tinkered my moped better than any of my mates would have, because he was made by a guy that used to work in Formula One. So I had the best moped around.
Oh, I'm jealous of you. I don't think I would have been allowed to have had a moped in the day. You probably would have got around on a train or a bus or something like that. I didn't have
moped all the way, mate.
Unbelievable. I'm jealous of you. So it's quite clear to me you know quite a thing or two about cars. Actually, just one question before I do move on. Obviously, the French don't have that passion for the French Grand Prix anymore, and I can understand why, but they still have a passion for Le Mans, the 24-hour. And I love that race. I love endurance racing, and there's something about Le Mans and the 24-hour and the carnival atmosphere that they just embrace every year, much like the Tour de France. They just go all in, and then everyone just enjoys themselves like it's a party atmosphere. I've never seen anything else like it.
Yeah, this is one of my dreams, to actually go to Le Mans one day. I know my dad and my uncle used to go and camp there and do it when they were, early 20s and when they were young. And one day I think I will do it. I hope I can. It's a bit further come from Australia, because the timing is a bit, just a bit early for me in the year to just be there and make it. But one day I'll do it, because there's this whole party atmosphere, and I think you can't transcribe it on television. You can't transcribe it anywhere else. You have to be there and understanding that 80% of that circuit Le Mans is actually roads you can drive any other Sunday, but not that weekend. And the fact that this whole area comes to light when it's either Le Mans with motorbike or Le Bol d'Or or the Grand Prix. They tried at some point for 1 year to run the French Grand Prix at Le Mans, but they understood very quickly that they shouldn't, because it's two different branding, and that would damage both instead of enhance both. So back in the 60s, they did once or twice max, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but they did this, but it understood this is not the same product. So therefore, there's really a love and attachment by the French public for Le Mans. It's always on TV. You can watch the whole race 24 hours on TV in France on free to air. It starts at 3:00 and finish at 3:00 the next day. And it's 24 hours of television just in cars running around. And some of them are commentated and some of them are not during the night. They don't commentate. It's just the cars going around. It's quite hypnotic, to be honest.
I think I would just be sitting there for the whole 24 hours and just not move. That's me.
Exactly.
That's just me. Because I love that kind of racing. It's just amazing.
Absolutely. And we had French success as well.
Yes.
Peugeot with the 905, they did super well at Le Mans, and that all brought a new era. I think I think you need national success into such races. So I'm sure if Pierre Gasly or Ocon start to battle it up for the World Championship at some point, that will bring an interest in France. I mean, the fact that both of them, when you think about it, if I go back to Formula One, both of them have won Grand Prix in the past couple of years, things that didn't happen for 21 years before. I mean, the last Grand Prix before was Olivier Panis in Monaco, before Gasly won in Imola, and Gasly wasn't even born.
No, he wasn't. So
no, he wasn't.
And I remember.
He was, but he was a tiny. He was 2 or 3 years old, like he was a baby.
Yeah,
and that's crazy. That's crazy.
I remember when Olivier won the Monaco Grand Prix in a car that wasn't really meant to win. It was just one of those bizarre wins, but it was the one win that Olivier got, and people still remember it to this day.
Absolutely, absolutely. He still speaks about it as well.
I know he does.
He does.
This is the Motor Dream Podcast.
All right, I want to know a little more about how much you love cars. What was the first car that you drove?
Oh, so I'll tell you what I said to all my girlfriends at the time. It's an Italian coupe, a red Italian coupe. But in fact, it was a Fiat Uno, a red Fiat Uno. So Fiat Uno is the lowest of the Fiat you can get.
So you basically bullshitted your way around.
yeah, of course, because it was basically a 2-door Barina, but it was red, and it's a Fiat Uno. So it's a funny joke. But I didn't actually own that much cars, but some of them are that many cars, but some of them highlight, I owned the 1974 Beetle, which was called Bert, and which I had to sell because in Australia, that was in Australia, but in Australia, you can't fit a baby seat at the back of a Beetle. It's hard. And I just became a father, and it became too complex for me to keep that car, especially it was leaking fume inside the car as well.
Yeah.
So I was kind of forced to sell this one, but I regret it. But in terms of car, I've been pretty conservative. I had a Renault Clio, I had a Toyota RAV4, so pretty conservative cars, to be honest. But I'm not disregarding the fact that one day I'll win TAS and buy it. And if you ask me what I would buy, then I would not buy a Ferrari. I would probably buy an Aston Martin. That's where I would go.
Ooh, okay. I want to come back to that. Who taught you how to drive when you were growing up?
Illegally, my dad, because we went onto car parks and stuff when I started to be 15, 16. He helped me at night in the evening in a supermarket car park. But then after that, I sort of knew how to operate a car. Then I went through the whole driving license and did the whole system. But technically, my dad illegally on a car park at night.
Okay. That's, yeah, you can get around it without getting yourself into too much trouble. Yeah, but
Yeah, exactly. Like an empty car park is an easy thing. An empty supermarket car park on a Sunday at 8, 9 p.m. It's pretty safe.
Best memory in a car?
Oh, can I say this? I'm not sure. No, I'll be conservative. There's some of it, but I'll be conservative.
Please.
I tell you what, my uncle again, he used to. So my family was from Paris, but he used to live in the Alps, and very often on Friday he would be in Paris and going back for the weekend in the Alps, and he would drive us, me and my cousin, myself, and himself. We would drive down the big motorway. If you know motorways in France, they're just amazing.
They're massive, yeah.
And he had a Peugeot 205 GTI.
Oh,
And we would drive the three of us with Pink Floyd blasting out in the car. And it would be in the winter because we were going skiing for the weekend. In the winter, minus 10 degrees, the car dripping down the motorway and Pink Floyd full blast in the dark. That is a memory that would live with me forever in a car.
where were you heading to at the time? Was it Val Thorens or somewhere
No,
else?
no, no. He lived in Geneva.
Oh,
So
okay,
it
in
was,
Switzerland.
yeah, heading to Switzerland and skiing in the area.
That
My
would be...
second best memory is a few years back. I was lucky enough to do a full practice run on a GT3 here at Melbourne Grand Prix. And I did 30 laps of the Melbourne Grand Prix as a passenger in a Porsche GT3, and I thought I would die. I thought I was gonna die.
Really?
Yeah, I was so sick, mate. I was so like I'm car sick. This is the funny thing is I am actually car sick. I have to drive. If I don't drive, I'm car sick. And the guys at the Tour de France know this because at the Tour last year, for example, the driving was 11,976 kilometers, and I've driven every single one of them. So because I don't not drive, otherwise I'm sick. But then I was a passenger in that GT3, 30 laps at Albert Park in full testing thing. I was so bad. Like I could have done another 20 lap after refueling, and I decided to get out. I was reaching. I could not stand it anymore. But I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
You're a brave soul to actually survive 30 laps or so as a passenger, and then getting out and not vomiting as a result of that. You're a very...
I don't think I've been that close without doing it. Like if I found the line, I find the line, the limit on this. But the funny thing is that it was really an experience for me because I play a lot of I don't play a lot of Xbox or PlayStation, to stop naming names, but the one game I play is the Formula One game.
Yeah.
And the one Grand Prix I love is the Melbourne Grand Prix. I think this is the perfect circuit for Formula One, and I know it by heart. Like honestly, I know it every corner, everything in the PlayStation, and doing that was exactly like the PlayStation, except I was sick. So it was doing the thing if you were charged up in tequila, on tequila, and it was so hard to resist, but it was so good to just see how realistic the actual Xbox is, but doing it in a GT3 car. It was incredible. So those are my two memories in the car.
That's pretty cool.
That I can tell you.
Yeah, you can tell me. Yes, you can probably tell me the bad stuff off air. Please keep that between us. One final thing: what's your pet peeve when it comes to car fads, like stickers or the fluffy dies? Do you like them?
No. Like for me, it's as original as possible. It needs to be neat. It needs to be as original. So, for example, when I had my Beetle, I wanted it to be like it would be as close as possible from the 1974 when it came out of the garage. If today, and we talk about the dream garage, there's a couple of cars I would want in my dream garage. I would love to have them as close as possible to the original. I'm not into fluffy dice or big, like a dog with a shaking head at the back, or the turbo stickers or that sort of thing. Clean.
I think that's a pretty decent estimate. But actually, a few people that I've already spoken to, they're very much the same. They like to have nothing, like no stick family stickers, no fluffy dice. Just leave the car alone. That's what they
I mean,
want.
I'm the one that when I bought my car today, the car that I own, first thing I did in the actual dealership is to remove the sticker from the dealership at the top. Because I hate this. You go. I'm not advertising you anyway, but I just want the back window to be clean. I don't want the dealership sticker on it. I don't need it.
Fair answer, I think. Fair answer.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Christophe. One day you wake up and your phone has a notification. It's a text that says, check your bank balance. So you check the bank app on your phone and you find out that you've become an instant billionaire. You've become an Elon Musk kind of billionaire. And you're thinking, well, how did this all happen? Why did I deserve this? You then get an email and it tells you that you can spend anything on any car you like. You can have anything you want, but the caveat is you're only allowed to have 3 machines in your dream garage. It can be a car, it can be a bike, it can even be a boat if you wanted to. So, Christophe Mallet, please tell me what the first car, bike, machine that you would have in your dream garage.
It will be a brand new, and I say brand new because not the old one. The old one will be the second choice. A brand new Renault Alpine A110, the latest Alpine that is out. That would be my first choice. Above any Aston Martins or any other Ferraris or whatever, I would go for the Renault Alpine A110.
800.
The A110.
The latest one. Okay. Well, I've just looked at the traditional one. I mean, that looks really
That would be
nice.
my second choice. The problem on this is that I've been in the old one, the 60s one. I've driven it, and I'm too tall. I'm way too tall. It's a small car,
Really?
and my head touches the roof, but big time. Yeah, you actually have to tilt the head. So it's a car for little people, not for big people like me. So I would own it, but just to put it in somewhere and look at it and say how such a thing a beauty that is. But I would not be able to drive it. The new one, I probably can. So that's where I would go.
Okay. And what made you fall in love with the A1110?
Just actually because when my uncle was researching to build his own car, he built the A310, but the A1110 was just starting to be mythical. He won the World Rally Championship. Actually, it's the first car to be World Rally Champion. When the Rally Championship was created, the A1110 was the first car. So there's this mythology, and like I said, Alpine was a brand that I grew up with. I had like Alpine jackets. I had Alpine polo shirts when I was a kid. I had, this sort of thing. I still have a Renault Sport jacket than when I was a kid, actually. But yeah, I've got it here in Melbourne as well.
Wow.
But I can't fit in it. But one day my kid would fit in it, and they would hate it. But I would take that photo. I'm sure I would take that photo.
Well, the Renault one, the Alpine A110 had 6 World Championship victories in the World Rally Championship. Jean-Claude André and Jean-Luc Therrien and Bernard Darnich as well. They're the drivers, and Jean-Pierre Nicolas.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and then Ragnotti came just at the end as well, and then he moved on into the Renault 5 era. But they were the real warriors of rallying at the time.
Yeah.
And why I would choose the new one today, it's just because I think, like I said, I hope I was hoping all my life Renault will revive the Alpine brand, and now I'm a happy man because the brand is well and truly and alive, and it's on your screen around the world in Formula One. And people don't know the history of Alpine, but secretly, and not so secretly, I do. and I love this. And the fact that they just came back with a new car and a new generation, and Renault has done it, this is why it would be my new car. But today is tiny, it's a little bit more expensive, or too expensive for me. It's about 150 grand here in Australia. So it's just tiny. It's a bit too much for me at the minute on my SBS salary.
Oh, we all wish. But look, I'm going to allow both the old and new as the first car in your dream garage. So we'll allow the two of them to be a combined first dream car. I'll accept that. that.
So the second one,
yes.
You want the second one?
Yes.
Definitely a 205 GTI. Definitely a 205 GTI, that Peugeot, because of the history, but I just absolutely love that car. And I'm hating myself because maybe 5-10 years ago I could have bought one, and it was not too expensive. It was still not really cool again, but today they are quite expensive. They're 30-40 grand for an average one. A good one will set you up around 40 grand, and it's a lot of money to put into a car that is 30 or something years old. So I would definitely buy a completely refurbished Peugeot 205, and it had to be the 1.9 liter, and probably in a they used to call it gris anthracite, so it's like the dark black gray color.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
It's the original color.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the 205, but I also like the 405, the MI16 405.
Yeah. See, I wouldn't do that. Like for me, this is the thing in France. We have this thing for little cars. There's no one at 18 that would dream of a 405. We always, and still to this day, dream about small cars. We've got this idea of small, punchy cars, the so-called young timers now.
Yeah.
And this is really still to this day. Like I know my nephew is 17. He's only dreaming of small cars, so like the Cupra, but a small Cupra, or this sort of cars, not the big ones. Not like we dream of having our own small car that is quite fast. So I would not dream of a 405. I'm sorry, Connor.
Oh, that's all right. No, I don't hold that against you. But I look at the results as a rally car. The 205 was very successful as well in World Rally. Like Ari Vatanen, Timo Salonen, and Bruno Sabi. I mean, they're names that have really established the 205 as the ultimate gun car, the ultimate hatchback for that era.
And it's funny what you mentioned, because here and this is very interesting, I think, because look at the success France has as car manufacturers, but also as drivers in the rally championship lately with Sébastien Loeb, for example. But Sébastien Ogier. But then if you go back to all these years, there's also a driver that is completely almost forgotten to this day, but it's Michèle Mouton, which was the first woman, to be in a world champion. But she drove for Audi, and she was never liked in France for that, because she was competing with the Peugeots. So it's funny, because we were more attached to the cars themselves than the nationality of the drivers. So people were celebrating more a Finnish winning in a French car than a French woman or French rider, not woman, because there was other guys that were winning in different cars as well, but not winning on a French car.
Do you think the French have changed their attitudes towards Michèle now because of her success?
Yeah, and also because she's still here and she's still very vocal and vibrant, and have a big say as well in the sport itself. And she's one of the top dog at the FIA in rallying.
Yes.
So she's very well regarded. But it's funny, at the time she was seen, and other, like there was Oriol as well. They were seen as the traitors. They were seen as a traitor because they could have driven for a French car and didn't. But why? Like, looking back, you could go, that's absolutely ridiculous. As a line of thought, they did what they wanted.
Exactly. But it was a great era just to see Peugeot and Audi just fighting against one another for supremacy. It was a great era.
Yeah, the Audi Quattro. I remember that. Didn't like her because she was not driving for the French.
Well, you can't have. You can't like everyone. You can't like everyone.
No, it's true. One of my big thing, and I'm so happy. Actually, SBS allowed me to do this one day. Is I interviewed Alain Prost. We're talking about Alain Prost, and I was lucky enough to interview him at the Grand Prix. I've covered the Australian Grand Prix several times, and I had my 5 minutes with Alain Prost, and that was so satisfying. That was just the pinnacle of probably of my career. It was the top, like knowing that my granddad worked for him ultimately at some point, but then I was here in Melbourne interviewing him. It felt like I was sort of looping the loop, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, your third dream vehicle. What is it?
So okay, it's not going to be a dream one because I actually own one. This is mine. Okay, but I love it to death. Even though he actually tried to kill me and I broke my shoulder and I had to get the whole shoulder reconstructed. But it's my Vespa Piaggio PX 200. So it's an old scooter, an old Piaggio, an old Vespa.
Yeah.
And I had an accident 4 or 5 years ago, and I had I've got 12 screws in my shoulder now because of it. But I haven't ridden it since then. But I can't sell it. It's in my garage. It's there. I'm looking at it. It's fixed. It can go out. I actually don't really take it out. I'm not feeling it anymore. It was quite a bad accident. I'm not feeling it anymore, but I just can't sell it. So you'll have to stay in my garage, basically.
It's just something. It's just something that you have an emotional attachment to.
100%. I just love this old. It's the last of the two-stroke engines Vespa imported in Australia. I bought it in 2004, and I arrived in 2004. So it's really like 6 months after arriving in Australia, I bought this scooter, and he's still with me. He came from Perth to Melbourne, where I live now. So I lived in Perth before, and I just can't sell it. I'm just emotionally attached to it, and I always said I'm never going to sell it, even though I don't have the need and the will to ride it at the minute. He might come back. I just hope he will come back. I mean, I've taken it down the block and stuff, but it's just more about the traffic and being in the traffic. And I'm into bikes now, so it's probably better for me as well in terms of health.
In terms of health and well-being, exactly. You did mention. Go on.
My PX is in my dream garage. So it's the basic of my dream garage, if you want.
Fair point indeed. But you did mention before Aston Martin. Now, I might allow this exception here to add an Aston Martin into the garage. Now, which particular Aston Martin would you want?
But why would you choose anything else than a DB9? It has to be a DB9.
Oh,
this is the DB9. This is the ultimate Aston Martin, I think. So it would be any DB9. But again, I would go for very low key. I don't want massive spoilers. It would have to be racing green.
Yeah.
Probably leather interior. Probably a cream sort of beige interior inside the Aston Martin. But it has to be a DB9. I'm not too much into the SUVs and stuff they're putting out now. The DB9 is original and just absolutely astonishing.
See,
DB9.
I would love to have an Aston Martin, that particular model. The racer in me wants to have the DB RS9, which is the GT3 version of that car. And it's got the wings and everything, but man, it is so cool to listen to.
Maybe I'm just older than you, Conor. I think that's
no, just a little bit, maybe just a little bit, but it is a nice car. You just look at it and you go, yeah, that's the ultimate Aston Martin. I'm going to allow it. I'm going to allow that.
Good.
So it's just, you can't ignore an Aston Martin. It's just, you either like them or you don't, and most people like them, and I'm one of those people, and if I had one in my garage, yes, I would be a very happy man. So
absolutely.
So the Vespa, the Alpine A1110, the Peugeot 205, and the Aston Martin DB9. That's your dream garage.
Exactly. It's not exuberant.
No.
It's okay, actually. Sounds good.
It's a pretty decent garage. So I think that's a pretty nice way to say, job well done. That's a pretty decent choice, if I do say so myself. So all I can say, Christophe, thank you so much. Thank you for opening up a little bit about your passion growing up in France, about cars, and about your grandfather being in Renault in that halcyon time of Formula One, the turbo era. It was quite an eye-opening experience just to listen to how passionate everyone was back in the day. And I really hope that for your country's sake, that passion does come back and Alpine gets very successful once again with Gasly and Ocon, and hopefully they can win a world championship, hopefully in our lifetime.
Absolutely. And then the funny story with these guys, and we'll finish on this. They were born only 10 kilometers away from each other in villages in Normandy, and they grew up in Normandy, which is basically mega countryside. Yeah. And they end up being driver 1 and 1 because there's no 1 and 2, but they're both mega driver for the biggest French brand in Formula One. How incredible life can be. You can be from a tiny village and end up on top of the world. 100%.
Christophe, thank you so much for joining me on the Motor Dream podcast. It's been a pleasure to have a chat with you, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon and talk more about cars.
Thank you, Conor.
Cheers. I'm still blown away by Christophe's story of turning up to school in his grandfather's Alpine, as well as the fond memories that he has of his grandfather working alongside of Prost and Arnoux during the turbo era of Formula One. Coincidentally, Christophe actually knows a Supercars winner and a Bathurst winner to boot. He's good friends with Alex Premat, the 2019 winner of the great race, and you never know, we might try and get Alex Premat on the show. Hopefully Christophe can pull a few strings here and there along the way. I'm pleased to say that Christophe has very kindly sent me some photos of the very car he rode to school in. You can check them out in the show notes via the Motor Dream podcast website at themotordream.com.au. The website is also where you can find all past episodes, information on all the guests who've appeared on the podcast, and links to connect us on all the socials. Speaking of the socials, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram with the handle The Motor Dream, which is also the hashtag. And as always, please like and subscribe and leave some feedback. All feedback, good and bad, is always appreciated. And share with your friends. That's how the word gets out about this show. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Motor Dream podcast. I'm Conor McNally, and I hope you can join me again soon for another episode. As always, please drive safe. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Motor Dream podcast. This series is proudly produced by Beast Productions.